560, The Answer.
Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. The Federalists reporting on the censorship industrial complex that we've been talking about quite a bit over the last several months, thanks in part to the reporting by Michael Schellenberger and Matt Taibbi, two of the reporters that were also instrumental in the Twitter files reporting. Again, men of the left, both of them. We've talked about their testimony before the House Weaponization of Government Committee as well. Well, it's difficult to prevent the inertia behind continuing to fund these third-party cutouts, and that seems to be what the deep state, for lack of a better description, is doing with the support, obviously, of one political party in particular. Texas Republican Reps Roger Williams and Beth Van Doon write in a letter to the Global Engagement Center's James Rubin, who's a former Assistant Secretary of State. Williams and Van Doon chair the Committee on Small Business, Subcommittee on Oversight, Investigations, Regulations. The U.S. State Department, it continues to fund the GEC, which develops censorship tools for social media companies. The GEC is a State Department sub-agency that funded the development of censorship tools and used government employees to act as sales reps pitching censorship products to big tech, is what Margot Cleveland reported earlier. Through GEC, State Department funded the Global Disinformation Index, which we've talked about, one of these new tools. This is a disinformation tracking organization, so it presents itself, working to blacklist and defund sites that it say contain disinformation. Golly, what sites do you think those are? Like the Federalist, the Daily Wire? That's why there's a suit against the State Department over this very issue. And this is, again, the pending decision coming down in Missouri v. Biden is about this whole government using third parties to do unconstitutionally what it cannot do unconstitutionally. It's unconstitutional when they do it directly or indirectly, but that's what they were doing. And we saw this in the Twitter files as well. In fact, Rubin and the Global Engagement Center are named defendants in the lawsuit filed by the Federalist and the Daily Wire et al. NewsGuard, with board members that include former CIA Director Michael Hayden, General Michael Hayden, former DHS Secretary Tom Ridge. Again, developing censorship tools that social media companies may use on the provider side, could use a la carte on the user side. But the whole point here is in terms of where they're going to stay ahead of what is likely to come down from the Supreme Court in Missouri v. Biden about this unconstitutional use of third parties, is we won't have the government fingerprints on it anymore. We'll put government actors who know what to do, don't need any instruction, in the same position in these third-party operations and just let them do what they're going to do working with the big tech companies because they know what to do. Michael Benz, former cybersecurity dude at State.
Anticipation of a devastating Missouri v. Biden ruling is to do a sort of middle-out restructuring, whereas instead of having things run out of CISA at the DHS or the State Department's Global Engagement Center, it would be run out of what they're calling a middleware company, a censorship service provider who sits in the middle between the user and the platform, but is intermediated by essentially intelligence agency and government and major government figures who inform that middleware censorship companies policies, and filtering mechanisms. So NewsGuard is an example of this. NewsGuard, of course, has Rick Stengel on its board, who ran the Global Engagement Center at the State Department, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, who was the head of NATO for 5 years in the Obama administration, Tom Ridge, the former head of DHS, and General Michael V. Hayden, who was a former four-star general, head of the NSA, and head of the CIA. So that's who's in control, essentially, of the middleware censorship provider, who is now also doing censorship compliance for this new European Digital Services Act. They're trying to get congressional regulations to mandate middleware so that it looks like it's coming from the private sector when indeed it's, again, being intermediated by these intelligence cutouts.
For more on this and the intel agency's attempt to manipulate presidential election outcomes, particularly if Trump is on the ballot, pleased to be joined by Georgetown University professor and former CIA intelligence analyst. He's also the author of Neutering the CIA, Why U.S. Intelligence versus Trump Has Long-Term Consequences. John Gentry joins us now. Professor, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Good morning.
A lot to talk about, but I wanted to get you, and by the way, I'll say it before you do, because it's interesting, very much like we talk about Taibbi and Schellenberger. I've watched a couple of talks you've given. John Gentry did not vote for Trump in 2016, did not vote for Trump in 2020. He has no plans to vote for him in 2024. That's correct, right,
Yes.
Professor? Okay. So just giving you perspective in terms of politics, read into that what you will. The censorship industrial complex that is being much reported on, mainly by Schellenberger and Taibbi, but not exclusively. How much of a concern is what you heard Michael Benz describe, what you've seen, I'm sure, from the reporting I mentioned? How much of a concern is that for you?
Well, I think it's a big concern. We have a huge amount of disinformation in the country as a whole, and unfortunately, our government, U.S. government, is not trusted by either the left or the right to be an adjudicator of what truth is anymore. My focus, of course, is more narrowly on intelligence officers.
Understand, and so on that score, one of the discussions I saw from you is focus on what you call sort of bottom-up politicization of the agency. What do you, of CIA specifically? What does that mean?
Well, for many, many years, going back to the very beginning of the U.S. intelligence community and CIA in particular, since in 1947, there was an organizational culture which said very clearly that it was inappropriate behavior to inject or suppress, as the case may be, information that would serve something other than the national interest. So that would be personal, organizational interests that are material or political or ideological in nature. And these have occurred very rarely in U.S. intelligence history, but they became very prominent in 2016. And having experienced this myself for a short time in the 1980s, it was a real wake-up call to me. So this is a major new event in intelligence history.
Do you peg that to an op-ed that former acting CIA Director Mike Morrell penned in 2016 endorsing Hillary Clinton?
Yes, that was the first of the obvious ones. The 5th of August, he wrote an op-ed piece in the New York Times in which he said his career at CIA was calling it as he saw it, and that's what he was doing now. But what he was doing was two things very differently than it was traditional in CIA. He was calling a domestic issue, and he was making a recommendation for people to make a policy decision, in this case voting. So he misrepresented, in essence, the role of CIA to make his partisan political statement.
So you talk about this bottom-up politicization of the agency. So it's interesting because what we hear normally is we've got a leadership problem at FBI or we've got a leadership problem at DOJ, but all the rank and file, these are good men and women doing the country's work best they know how, and they're trying to stay out of the political arena. But what your suggestion is that's not exactly the case.
Well, yeah, yes, but I think actually still most of the people in the intelligence community still are adhering to the old apolitical traditions, but there are loud and vocal partisans who are former intelligence officers who are under much less control or restrictions than government employees are per the Hatch Act, which prohibits partisan activity. And there is a growing number, but still probably a minority of activists within the agencies that express their politics through leaks. So
Would
the
you
number of leaks rose markedly in the Trump administration.
Mm-hmm. And so, would you call the first impeachment proceeding against Trump related to that phone call with Zelensky? Would you call that an example of the political activism, the politicization that you're describing in your book?
Well, it was political activism. I wouldn't call it politicization in this case. You had the story, as I understand it, is that there was a CIA analyst who had been on the White House staff during the Obama years, expressed unhappiness with Trump, was sent home, then got warning about the telephone call from Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, and then approached the House Intelligence Committee, and that sent things off to the races. So it wasn't politicization in altering an intelligence product, but it certainly was activism in the sense of being an intermediary between a White House person and the House Intelligence Committee.
So this politicization, why should we be concerned about it if it's a group of loud partisans, but most of them are outside the agency, and I guess if they're not part of these censorship gambits, then they're just talking heads on MSNBC or CNN. So what's the big deal?
So what's the big deal? There are multiple big deals still, even though some concerns I think are overblown. There are a number of important concerns. One, when formers who make political comments in the context of their intelligence expertise talk, that generates diminished confidence in the intelligence community. Senior decision makers do not have to listen to intelligence if they don't trust it. If it's not credible, they won't use it. And we know from a lot of history that intelligence, for all its limitations, is a help. What we also have is a situation in which the organizational cultures, and particularly the CIA, John Brennan in his book and interviews and so on made the point that he specifically tried to alter the organization of the organizational culture at CIA, and we know that when ideological bias becomes part of the analytic process, that analytic judgments are sometimes mistaken. So if you have then this kind of mistake, that leads to worse intelligence analysis, which in turn again damages national decision making. And a final point here is that not so much for the formers, but the current intelligence officers, through leaks of purposely inaccurate information, are in essence saying they wish to influence the democratic processes in the country. So I would not argue that this is the greatest threat to democracy in the country, but you have some federal employees who are violating the Hatch Act in the sense that they are trying to influence domestic politics. All of those things are very, very unfortunate from a national perspective.
Which is the most corrupting and the most damaging to the agency? Let's stick with CIA for the purpose of this. What you're describing there that's happening at the analyst level and maybe the managerial level, or what we saw with Mike Morell being asked by Tony Blinken to write to organize that letter that was published before the November 2020 election that included a lot of former CIA saying that the Hunter Biden laptop had all the earmarks of a Russian disinformation campaign,
Right.
which
I think
more
both.
damaging.
Yeah, I think both of them are damaging. We don't really know what the leaks, what the analytic culture change implications are because we haven't had major failures yet. But the Hunter Biden laptop case is I think the most obvious, easy to grasp, and egregious case of the injection of intelligence into the political processes. As you outlined, Morell was asked to do this. He approached a number of former, not current, but former intelligence officers. All of the ones who signed that letter had signed previous open letters. And the pitch, according to one of the people who was approached, was that this was to help the Joe Biden campaign. The pitch was not, would you lend your intelligence expertise to take a look at this? It was, let us use your reputation for partisan purposes. And for that, in that way, it was highly inappropriate behavior.
And do you believe that affected the outcome of the election?
I have a political science background. I'd be skeptical of any things like that, any comments like that. But you had a drumbeat of efforts openly through formers on MSNBC and op-ed pieces and so on, and you had the leaks occurring through the full 4 years into 2020, and I think they contributed. And I think probably the leakers and the formers think that they contributed to Donald Trump's defeat. I think they're probably happy about that. And if need be, they will be willing to do that again later on in 2024.
So so essentially you argue that the last 8 years represents a break in abuse within the agency and by formers of the agency. I mean, there's politics that creep in. It's always been the case, but that this is qualitatively different than in previous periods over the last 100 years, say in America. That's what you argue, right?
Yes, absolutely. Both quantitatively and quantitatively different.
So, I mean, maybe Trump isn't the best vehicle available, but I mean, you just said that the people who did the Hunter Biden letter would happily do it again. They clearly have, if you believe that, then you clearly believe they have no concern for the legitimacy of the agency in the mind of the American public. So how could you go with somebody that they do support one more time?
How would you go with someone who they do support?
They do support, like Biden's reelection, for example.
Yeah. Well, they mainly were going against Trump, so that implicitly then was for Biden. All of the activists this past cycle, not before, but this past cycle, have been from the political left. So they have been anti-Trump. They went after Mike Pompeo. They went after General Flynn, and so on, all for purposes of helping the Democratic candidate. So my guess is, to follow up, is that we probably we'll see a new crop of former activists. People like Mike Hayden, as you mentioned, have become very clearly partisan and probably have had their credibility damaged. But there'll be a new crop that will arise, I think, later on this year.
But you don't align with those people in terms of what they're doing.
Align with them? No, I don't align with them. My motive, you mentioned earlier on, I'm not talking about this from a partisan perspective. My interest, my focus here is trying to identify what happened from a social science perspective on the one hand, but also trying to convey to listeners that this is a bad thing from the national perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Politics in any form in American intelligence is a bad thing because it has consequences of the sort that I mentioned. And this will occur whether the politicization is from the political right or the political left.
Georgetown University professor, former CIA intelligence analyst, and author of the book Neutering the CIA, Why U.S. Intelligence versus Trump Has Long-Term Consequences. He is John Gentry. Professor Gentry, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to podcasts of Dan and Amy from the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
Support our police and hire the police to personally protect you. You've watched the news. Rising crime has been affecting our everyday lives in Illinois more and more these days. Blue Star Security can protect you, your business, or your place of worship. Blue Star Security is the only security company in Chicago with over 900 off-duty police officers, all W-2 employees.
I'm Jeffrey Salvetti, Vice President of Blue Star Security and a 15-year law enforcement veteran. The Blue Star team is made up of over 900 state